Once the emotion dies down of a moment, sometimes you see things through a little bit of a different lens. I want to make sure that I say this very, very clearly. The Jimmy Garoppolo injury is awful. He is a human being. His foot is still being examined. There could be something even more serious going on there. I don't need to tell everybody here that I'm a very big fan of this guy and this player. I think he's done unbelievable things for the 49ers and handled weird situations in an awesome way. So the injury is just bad. It is bad. It is bad from every possible angle. However, scenarios play out the way they do. And the 49ers were on a march toward a playoff run and a problem at the exact same time. We've said it a few times. March was going to be weird. I don't know what it was they were necessarily going to do, and it's easy for them to do what Bob Myers told us before the year. Just enjoy this year. However, our minds don't always work that way, and so I don't know how this was going to play out or what the 49ers were going to want to do. But now you get a look at Purdy and that contract for a quarterback that you weren't ready to sign. Now you don't necessarily have to sign it. There is a way of looking at this that could say this is likely to end up being a blessing in disguise for the organization. How does that grab you?
It grabs me very accurately, and I think that the angst was mainly fan angst. I think the team was in a spot where they were going to say goodbye to Jimmy Garoppolo no matter what. The only thing that would have maybe made it more difficult was if he won the Super Bowl. Short of him winning the Super Bowl, they would have parted ways with Jimmy Garoppolo. They weren't going to pay him $30 million a year to be retained as the starting quarterback when you've got Trey Lance. And now that what you know about Brock Purdy, at least he's a competent guy who can step in and play, at least make it look like he knows what he's doing. So now you've got two quarterbacks because you have faith in Trey Lance. He was the guy you drafted after all, and you still want to take a look at what you have with Trey Lance. I don't think that you've seen enough of Trey Lance to move off of him as QB1, so he's going to get the first look next year no matter what happens with Brock Purdy this year. Now, if Brock Purdy runs the table and you win the Super Bowl with Brock Purdy, well, now you go into next year with a real quarterback controversy, and then the Jimmy Garoppolo question is put aside. If Brock Purdy struggles from here on out, then you go into next year realizing you probably need a veteran to come in and compete with Trey Lance. You keep Brock Purdy as your 3, and you hope that maybe you can develop Brock Purdy down the road and he can be a possible piece. Now, who is that veteran you bring in? That's a completely different question.
Oh, Nate Sudfeld, of course.
I don't think it's going to be, Jimmy Garoppolo at the price that he was going to command. Jimmy Garoppolo has taken his last snap as a 49er QB, and yes, the injury has made that much more easy for the 49ers and their front office, but at the same time, going into next year, you will need a third quarterback. It just depends what kind of a third quarterback.
Yeah, that's sort of the scenario that I was even thinking about. I mean, if Jimmy did run the 49ers far but not far enough, which I think was what the bettor would tell you was most likely this year, I actually think that fan pressure would have been very, very high to not have Jimmy go. Especially with all the success he's had when he's healthy. But he is, again, not healthy. And so now you get this look at Purdy. That scenario you just laid out, I think is actually a pretty comfortable one for the 49ers. If Brock Purdy's good enough to be interesting, I'm not talking win the Super Bowl. If he's good enough to win some games, if he's good enough to go 3-2 or better the rest of the way, and you win the NFC West, and he's interesting in the playoffs. Let's say he wins that first week at home, and then there's a road trip, and that doesn't go well. Let's say you lose. Or
even if you lose in the NFC Championship game, if he does a Jimmy Garoppolo.
Yeah, like if you do that, are the 49ers at a high comfort level to say, all right, like QB competition.
Yes.
We got a rookie and a young guy who hadn't played. They would essentially be very similar experience level.
Right. Brock would actually have a little bit more.
Yeah, they're drafted in 2 different years, but it would feel very RG3 Kirk Cousins. And Cousins won the gig.
Right.
Oh, like it took time, and this did too.
And RG3 was hurt, maybe even worse than Trey Lance was hurt.
And Trey would obviously, he would be the presumptive one. You'd start next offseason like, yeah, that's our guy, but you had an openness to, I don't know what you're going to look like coming off of injury, or I don't know what you're going to look like at all.
I wonder if it would be an open competition, quite frankly.
Well,
if Brock Purdy goes, and he doesn't get the win, I know, in this last game over Miami, but let's say he wins 3 of 5 regular season and he wins 2 of 3 playoff, and now he's won 5 of his 8 games, not counting the Miami game, and he goes into next year looking like the guy. I think Kyle Shanahan opens it up and says, look, Trey, you got to fight for your right to quarterback.
Well, thank you, Ben. That's
You're
a very
welcome.
good reference. I don't know how they would handle that. There's so many things that we don't know yet, but I think a good organization drafts you and then forgets where they drafted you.
Exactly.
Elijah Mitchell, you can beat out Trey Sermon. And Jordan Mason, you can beat out TDP. I saw even 49er insiders going into last week. Oh, Jordan Mason got carries last week because he's on special teams. TDP is still ahead of Jordan Mason. No, he's not.
Was he activated?
He was active in play.
He didn't touch the rock.
No, Jordan Mason's ahead of him because a good organization, okay, Russell Wilson and what's his name? Matt Flynn. Who wins the job? We just gave Matt Flynn $1 bajillion.
Man.
Russell Wilson won the job. Why? Because he's better. A good organization drafts you or signs you and then forgets where they drafted you. So we'll see.